Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Soul Focused Radio. This is your host, Martin Friedman, and I'm running solo today just to intro and outro our episode, which is kind of funny because we actually had all three of us, myself, Cindy, and Martina, for the first time in a long time. And we were able to interview our CEO and co-founder, Mahdi. It was awesome. Can't wait for you all to hear this conversation. We are tying together the topics of emotional sobriety, actually emotional vulnerability, which we did sort of interchange together, emotional vulnerability and emotional sobriety with healing from trauma, and how that is very connected. And in many ways, getting to a place of emotional healing, emotional vulnerability, that's very emotional sobriety. That really is the work to heal from trauma. So I think you're really going to enjoy this episode a lot. Like I said, it was great to have all three of our voices on, and to have Mahdi back is always a pleasure. So sit back, enjoy, and here we go.
So have you ever heard of a term called groundwater? Groundwater is another word we use at the Soul Focus group that means subconscious programming. From the ages of 0 to 7, we are subconsciously programmed. So much information and choices and decisions are downloaded into our subconscious mind, and we begin to start living that life. And even though that life we're living is not the life we chose for ourselves, and it's not until we understand the impact of the groundwater, what the groundwater really is, that we begin to wake up to our own lives and begin to choose what we want for ourselves. At the Soul Focus group, we bring you to that consciousness so that you can begin to choose the life you want to live for yourself.
All right. We are ready to go with our main segment. This is Martin, and I'm here with Cindy, and I'm here with Martina, and I'm here with our very frequent and very special guest, Mahdi Davenport, also known as M. How you doing, M?
Doing well. How you doing, Martin? How's everybody on the call?
I'm doing good. It's great to be here. It's great to have all of us together. It's been a while.
Yeah, yes, it has.
I'm doing great as well. I was, telling Martina, I'm just happy that everyone is healthy, especially in my household. So, that's like a really critical thing, because once one kid gets sick, all the other kids get sick. So this is a good week.
Beautiful.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Mahdi, we want to thank you for taking the time. And, we've been running podcast episodes on the topic of emotional vulnerability and also healing from trauma. And we've had some amazing guests come and talk from many different angles about that. And Martina has shared stories, and Cindy has shared stories, and I've shared stories. And we wanted to have you on to really tie the two concepts together around healing from trauma and how does that connect with emotional vulnerability. So if you just want to jump in, and then, and we'll follow up with questions from each of us.
Well, when I think about emotional sobriety and healing trauma, what comes to mind for me is like what would be possible for ourselves if when we communicate with other people, that we always told the truth and we always accurately represented our internal reality. That we had no doubt about who we are and our place in the world, how different our life would be, how much less stress would be on our life if we were able to do that, right? So I think about that because I remember one time I was talking to Hank, and we were talking about revisiting all the possibilities that could have been if our parents weren't abusive or alcoholics at some point, right? Mm-hmm. And what would life would have been like if we got what we needed from our parents. And when we started talking about that, it immediately touched me in a way that I hadn't been touched before on this subject, because I was too afraid to imagine what life could have been like if both my parents would have been working together, and had a stable household. But of course, it was completely the opposite. So, but I had always been afraid to imagine what my life would have been like if I would have been parented correctly. If I would have received the nurturing and the care and the love that I needed to experience from my father and my mother, which I didn't. And that brought me into a vulnerable space because, as I said to you all before, I never wanted to imagine that because I never wanted to grieve, right? And I say that because grieving is a big part of this emotional sobriety. I think we stay emotionally drunk for a very long time because we don't allow our body the opportunity to grieve. And I say our body because grieving is a physical thing more than it's an emotional thing. You know, you I don't know if you ever heard of the book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Yes.
And so our trauma and our, of course, levels of emotion is, stored in our body, and our body walks around with that pain all our lives. From the minute we experience it, our body carries it. And then it gets to a point where the body can no longer carry it anymore. And grieving is the process of purging the pain from the body. And I had never grieved over what could have been possible if my parents were healthy. I never allowed myself to grieve, so I never allowed my body to purge the pain. And so when that conversation came up, it brought about a purging of the pain that my body had been walking around with and carrying for the past 30, 40, 50 years. So when I think about that, I think about the two together. And I think about how my life is now that I'm accurately representing my internal reality and not so focused on pleasing people or trying to say things that I think are going to impress people, but with just being who I am.
Can you, that's really, first of all, thank you. That was powerful. I felt it. I felt what you were saying. I wasn't just listening, but I really felt it in my body because, I've had similar thoughts and similar conversations, but the way that you described it, I really felt it. Can you talk about what was the fear? You said a few times that you were afraid of imagining that. What was the fear of imagining that? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, I think it's because I instinctively knew that it would trigger the grieving process, and I would have no control over the grieving process once it would start. And when it started, I would find myself crying over nothing. Like, I'd be watching a movie or watching a commercial on television, and it looks like two people love each other and care about each other, and it would bring me to tears. And I would be like, what is going on with me? And it was in the grieving process that I was allowing the grieving to happen. I was allowing my body to purge the pain from itself. And the way that it was signaling to me that I was going through grieving was the fact that I was always in tears, constantly. I'm talking about for the smallest thing. The smallest act of kindness would bring me into complete, utter emotional breakdown. And I began to become present to just how much pain my body had taken throughout these years that I've been alive. And it has not been an easy thing, but my body, which I love and care, and so thankful for, has been such a good partner to me in carrying me through this world. My body has endured a lot of pain, more emotional pain than physical pain. And I've spent most of my life, emotionally drunk because I wouldn't deal with the pain that my body was holding because I didn't know how. It was like I kept putting off dealing with the pain till later. Like when I become more mature, when I have more knowledge about myself, then I'm going to deal with this pain. So I kept putting it off. And I got to a point where I couldn't put it off anymore.
Definitely want Cindy and Martina to jump in. You got two things that I really want to respond to or emphasize. One, you sort of used emotional sobriety and emotional vulnerability interchangeably. And I love that. I think that's really appropriate, because I think you can't be emotionally sober unless you're also emotionally vulnerable. So the question I have, is connecting that idea of emotional vulnerability and emotional vulnerability and emotional sobriety, being so similar. and how, as much work as I know you've done, this feels like kind of a breakthrough in the healing process for you too. And how like that healing from trauma and emotional sobriety, emotional vulnerability are also connected.
Right. First of all, I would say this, that there's only so much pain your body can take before that emotion begins to metastasize in you and become some sort of illness that you have to deal with physically. But I would also add that emotional sobriety and vulnerability are the same thing, because when you are emotionally sober, you are vulnerable, because vulnerable is our natural state. We make a big emphasis on it because so many of us are walking around hiding who we are from other people, that we have to use the word vulnerable because we're describing the fear that we have of showing up as ourselves. But really, vulnerable could be interchangeable with authentic, right? The minute we show up authentic, we are, quote unquote, for some people's lens, being vulnerable. But if you think about it, the most important job that we have as human beings on this planet is to live. And the way living happens is facilitated is through the representation, the accurate representation of what is happening on the inside of us. Because what's happening on the inside of us has to be experienced. It will be experienced on the outside of us. And the better we get at representing it, the more smoother living becomes. So we're here to live. That's our purpose. But that's the only purpose why we're here, is to live. And we get better at living when we get better at representing ourselves.
I love that.
Wow, Mahdi, thank you so much. I was really moved by so much of what you said. And one thing I was wondering when you talked about the fear of jumping into the grieving process, something I think about when I think about imagining how life could have been different is I think I fear moving into a space of regret. And I'm wondering if that was anything that you experienced as you moved into your grieving process.
Yeah, good question. I would say that in the background, the fear of regret, I didn't want to become consumed by it. So that it did play a role. I think anytime grief is knocking at our door, possible resentment is also knocking at our door. When we start revisiting the past and what we, quote unquote, missed out on, what we didn't get, it's easy to use that as an excuse, our ego to use it as an excuse to not deal with the reality. And I guess, I didn't want to resent my parents. I wanted to understand my parents, but to understand my parents, I first have to take care of myself first. And that's what for years I hadn't been doing, because I was so busy trying to protect my parents in my own mind, in my own spiritual sphere. I was always protecting my parents and my view of my parents at the expense of sacrificing myself. And my body said, you can't do this anymore. You have to let go of this. You have to let go of this. You have to let go of this suffering.
Thank you for saying that. That helps me a lot in understanding how to not get stuck in a place of, like you said, resentment or regret. But like we always say, we have to take care of ourselves first. And so thank you. That was really helpful for me to hear.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking that question.
I'm feeling like, Mahdi, I think, again, thank you, for what you were saying about, the healing, the body, the pain, the vulnerability, all that together. How do you see that, tying into what we talk about? Like, so we've been having these conversations with different professionals and, different folks about these two concepts of healing from trauma and emotional vulnerability. How do you see them connected in terms of the soul focused group work? You've really centered yourself. And I think all of us through this process have been centering ourselves too, and the healing process. And then how does this connect to what we're bringing out into the world?
Well, I think it connects because I always imagine if the keys to running the world were turned over to us, and if we were now in charge, what kind of world would we create in the state that we were in for most of our lives? And that's a sober question that I always put before myself. And for years, if I had the keys to make the world into what I wanted to be, the world wouldn't be that much better. It is just now, in the last 10 years, that I would say if the keys were turned over to me, or the keys were turned over to the Soul Focus Group, and we were working to create the world in our own image and likeness, it would be healthier than ever before, because we are confronting and carefronting our own wounds, our own hurt, because it's hurt people that hurt people. And in the social justice, anti-racism movement, there are a lot of hurt people because racism has traumatized a lot of people. But we have made other people responsible for our healing, and other people are not responsible for our healing. It may be somebody else's fault. Someone else may be to blame for the injury caused, but the healing is always the responsibility of the injured. I know that may not sound good, and you may want to fight against it, but that's only your ego wanting to not accept responsibility for the healing, because it knows as you heal, it has to become more like your soul than like the world.
Yeah, I appreciate both of the things that you just said, Mahdi, because I'll start with the second thing, and it does, like, the way we've been programmed and conditioned to see, victims and perpetrators, and to see the world very black and white in that way. It really is ridiculous to think that if you've been victimized somebody, that you would count on them for your healing. Right. Like, I know that's odd, and it's counterproductive, but counterintuitive. But if you really think about it, like, if I've been victimized somebody, do I really want to wait and have them, do I need to wait for them for my healing? So I'm really feeling that piece. And then the other piece that you said, I'm glad you said what you did. If the world was turned over to us, I was at this event yesterday, and I was talking to this guy, this white dude, and he was pretty cool, and he does a lot of really good work with people coming off of addictions and coming out of prison. And him and I have a similar background in that way. And, but him and I were also talking, somebody introduced us, and they wanted me to tell them what we do and to talk a little bit about racism and stuff. And he said, I just wish everybody was just like me. He said, don't you wish everybody was just like you? And, because he's basically saying, I'm a good person, I'm a faithful person, and I just wish everybody was like me. And he said, he asked me that question, and I was like, no, I don't wish everyone was like me. First of all, I don't want everyone to have gone through what I went through to be where I'm at. And second of all, like, we all have to bring our unique process, our unique characteristics to the processes that we're a part of. And if somebody says, I wish everybody was like me, it makes me feel like there's probably a measure of healing they still have to do, right? Because if, part of being in good relationship with people is accepting their journey, their uniqueness, and where they're at. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think that's, it's not balanced. It's not sober, because there are aspects of myself that I'm still trying to develop, still working to mature and grow. And I know that who I am is perfect, just like who you are is perfect. But how we live, the strategies, the methods, and the tools we use to live are not perfect. And it is those things that I wouldn't want other people to copy. And it is not for other people to copy the blueprint of who you are originally, because their blueprint is perfect. There's no one else to compare us to. So, but what we all are learning is how to live better. Using the proper tools and learning what tools better represent us, because that's what it's all about. Living is about accurate representation of yourself. The more accurate we are in representing ourselves, the more happier and healthy we are. The more we misrepresent ourselves, the more garbage we have to deal with down the road. It's the more hurdles we put in front of ourselves that we have to jump over. It all comes from our misrepresentation. No matter what reason we misrepresent ourselves, we still have to deal with the effect of misrepresentation.
Wow. That's really powerful, Mahdi. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I've been pretty quiet because I've been sitting here listening. A lot of what you mentioned has really resonated with me. And I'm just sitting here like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. So, I'm just going to jump back a little bit, from the beginning, when you were just saying that you were emotionally intoxicated because you didn't want to deal with the grief. And to me, like that really resonated with me, because on our past couple of episodes, I did bring up my childhood trauma. And for a while I would act like I wasn't fazed by it, right? Like I would pretty much just run away from from that trauma. And I was scared that once I addressed it, I would have to go through the grieving process of why did that happen? And just to see just to think about what or how I would have been had that not happened to me. And so it just really resonated with me when you said that. And recently, as that has came out for me, I have been going through the grieving process of it. And I really do feel like the fact that I'm able to grieve it, I'm on a better path of healing from it. Because before I was so scared to address it. But now that I'm unpacking everything, I see myself. I feel a little bit better, right? I can't say I'm fully better from it, but I know eventually I will feel all the little bits will add up. And, I just was thinking about a conversation that I had with Dustin a while back, and he was just saying that you got to forgive them. And it was so hard for me to wrap my head around that, tying in to what you were saying, Martin. It's like, why do I have to be responsible for this to make myself, to help myself heal? And I realized that the forgiveness isn't for them, it's for myself. And so, once you brought up the responsibility aspect, I realized that it was my responsibility to help heal myself. And by doing so, I was able to finally forgive the other person for what had happened. And for that, it brought me peace.
Thank you for sharing and, and vulnerably, exposing more of yourself, because, like I said, that occurs to us as being vulnerable, but you were just being authentic. And when we accurately represent the true state that we're in, at any given moment, we are doing what we need to do to live, coming out of survival. I think about oftentimes, when I grew up, when I got like maybe 15, I started looking for pictures of myself as a baby, and there were none. No one had kept any pictures of me as a baby. And that alone would trigger for me the possibility of how painful grief would be if I went down that road, if I examined what my life would have been like if my parents had loved me enough to keep pictures of me. And to have to deal with that is not easy. It's not easy. And we could tell ourselves all sorts of stories to keep ourselves from dealing with it. But there's only a certain period of time before your body says, enough is enough. I cannot hold any more of this. You have to process this, or you're going to end up killing yourself with some sort of disease, some sort of illness, because it manifests as that if we don't start purging it from our bodies. So I would encourage everybody that's listening to this podcast that you stop waiting, because the healing process is in the purging of the pain, and no one else is responsible for healing the pain. Listen to me carefully. No one else is responsible for healing the pain except you. If you're sitting around waiting for the person who may be to blame for the cause of the pain to take action to heal the pain, it won't work. It never works. That is your ego distracting you from the reality that you are responsible for representing your inner reality, and no one else, because no one else knows what it is but you.
It was Carl Jung, famous psychologist and psychiatrist, I think he was a student of Sigmund Freud, who once said, when asked by one of his students, what is an ego? He said, the ego is this. He said, the world will ask you who you are, and if you say to the world you don't know, then the world will proceed to tell you who you are. And who the world tells you that you are becomes your ego. Your ego is who you are trying to be for other people. At the Soul Focus Group, we spend a lot of time recognizing that for years we have been leading off by trying to please people, and we have to reduce the size of our ego to get back into our soul. There's so many beautiful lessons for us to learn from our ego. It's not a negative thing, it is a something to learn thing. At the Soul Focus Group, we learn how to reduce our ego, which translates to us reducing our performative behavior and really start showing up authentic.
Yeah, thanks to everybody again, Cindy and Martina. I'm really loving this conversation. Mahdi, since at Soul Focus Group, we always, talk about the spiritual piece, which we're talking about right now, and also the social piece too. The way you just said what you said really also had me think about, what we talk about in terms of healing from racism and healing from sexism and classism and homophobia and heterosexism, and any other oppression that, we talk about the self-solidarity work, starting with what you just talked about, healing ourselves, but also this also, translates into the social justice work too, right? I mean, like that we've all been traumatized in our own ways from all of these different oppressions. And what we're saying is it's also our responsibility to identify the harm and to be responsible for our healing process.
Yeah, I think everything that we do systemically, collectively, is modeled by the individual. So if you pull out any one individual that's a part of a group and you survey their lives to see how healthy they are, you will be getting a snapshot of the group. Mm-hmm. And so we are as healthy as our illest individual in the group. And that's why, our job is to create an environment that supports healing of everybody. And so when you come to Soul Focus, we immediately start, you immediately feel yourself walking into an environment where healing is safe to heal. It's safe to be naked. No one is going to judge you and ridicule you, make fun of you. You're going to be accepted with open arms because we understand how important this part of the process really is to restoring your vision back to its original state, which is full of energy and life and love and joy, like we were when we were kids before we lost that state or that vibrational frequency.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, and something that really struck me that you said earlier, Mahdi, it surprised me when you said a while ago, if you had been given the keys to change the world, you don't think the world would have been in a better state. And to me, that was so surprising. I think one, because of how much I respect you and see you as a leader. And then two, like you said, you've been doing social justice work for so long. And so it makes it really, to me, highlight so many people in the social justice world. If they're not doing, if they're not feeling like the world would be in a better place if they're given the keys to change, how can we actually be leaders in this movement? And so to me, that really highlighted, again, what you were saying. We need to do that self-work.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I think about being authentic, right? And I think about how authenticity is really being honest about what you can't see. So we see our leaders, but our leaders are struggling with things all the time. Our leaders are in battles, just like you being a leader, and you have your own battles. And no matter how much work a leader does, that a leader knows things that they would like a level they would like to get to that perhaps they haven't gotten to yet. And so if keys were turned over to me to run the world, I would be honest, I would probably do a whole lot better job than a lot of people are doing, but it wouldn't be the world that I want it to be, because there were things that I was struggling to heal in myself. And when we're struggling to heal something that we're still in denial about, the pain about, we end up hurting other people inadvertently, unconsciously. And this is the cycle that we see in the world: hurt people, hurting people, hurting people, hurting people. And unless healing begins, the cycle will continue.
Thank you. It makes me think a lot about parenting, and in some ways parenting might be that unique experience where we're given some level of keys to not control the world, but to build a world for somebody to some degree. And so that really resonated with me. Thank you.
One of the things that really gives me hope is that when I look at my daughters, I see how I could have been if my parents were there for me.
Wow.
And they are that reminder to me, the beautiful spirit, how much they love and support each other, and just how they see possibility and they don't see any limit to what they're capable of doing in the world. And to know that I had some part of that is redemption for the struggles and pains that I received growing up. But when I look at them, I look at the possibilities of what it could have been for me. And so at least I know that that cycle of pain, that what they call a generational curse, is being ended through them.
Wow.
Mahdi, I'm thinking about what you just said. Thinking two things. One is, I really appreciate you saying that. And I think for so many of us at Soul Focus Group, like so much of our work is about cycle breaking, right? I mean, that's really what we're talking about.
Right.
We're talking about breaking generational cycles that, manifest in us as individuals. And we're also talking about breaking systemic cycles, structural cycles. This balance, the thing that's so strong on this podcast episode to me is this balance between what you just said and also not being, like acknowledging that there might be some resentment and some regret, but not staying in that place, because you can't break a cycle if you stay stuck in the place of resentment or regret. Right.
Right. I agree with that. I love my mother and my father, and, I've always loved them. So there's never been a question of whether or not I love my mother and father, who are both now no longer with me. But I loved them when they were here. They did not give me what I needed as a child because they weren't giving themselves what they needed. So they went through a cycle of trauma and abuse at some level, and they just did what was done to them, or they did what their lack of maturity could not support, right? And I recognize that. And I recognize that's the reality of being a parent. And if you're not mature in your parenting as an adult, what happens is you end up hurting your child and creating scars that no matter how sorry you are for creating them, it still creates an imprint on their psyche that they have to deal with.
Right. Absolutely. And I remember asking you this question one time, and I don't know if we did it on, I can't remember what we talked about on the podcast or whether it was just a conversation between the two of you. But I remember asking you one time if you wish that you had been your parent, because I was, doing some ACA work, and I was thinking, man, I wish I could have parented myself, just like, and it really hit me again when you were talking about how you've been able to parent your daughters. And, I remember you saying to me, no, that you had the exact parents that you needed. And that to me, if you, really, really sitting in that feeling, and I've really been thinking about that for myself too, that's a way to not be in the regret and the resentment. Cause, whether, there's been a lot of pain and a lot of struggle to get us to where we are, but we are here, and we are here, not but, and we are here. And, we are breaking cycles.
Right.
So we wouldn't be here exactly as we are if we hadn't had the parents and all the situations that we had in our lives.
True. And I would also say, as a part of being authentic, is that, we create stories for survival. We create stories that will hold us firm until we're able to get to a point to where we can deal with that grief. So that was a story I told myself that, of course, my parents were my parents, and it couldn't have been any different. If it could have been different, it would have been. But the truth is, if I had parented myself based upon what I know and the healing that I have experienced, I would have been a totally loving father. My child would have been safe. I would have been safe to, express my emotions and feelings. And because of that, be able to grow up whole and healed on the inside. If I was my parent, that's not judging my parents for what they did or didn't do. But what it is being honest about, yes, if I had the technology to, like, that I have and I live by now, to raise a boy that is me, yes, it would be totally different. There's no way I could say that would be the same, because my daughters are proof of that. It's totally different. And that is because of my parents.
Mahdi, I'm curious, as part of your grieving process and forgiveness too, did you grieve for your parents?
When they passed, yeah. I felt like I was cheated of the opportunity to really have a relationship with them. My father never told me he loved me. and my mother passed before I could really establish a real healthy relationship with. When I say healthy, I'm talking about like a relationship whereby when we would be together, we talk more about what's happening with us and what's going on inside of us than just the weather. You know, when you meet with somebody and you talk about inconsequential things versus talking about things that really matter to you.
Yeah.
You know, we never broke that barrier to have conversations that were truly connecting and meaningful. You know, I had this way of sending her money and taking care of her financially as my way of, you know, demonstrating my love for her to the degree in which I was able to, because I had never developed the emotional capacity to really love her because I never got a chance to get to know her.
Wow.
And that is something to grieve. And, you know, same thing with my father. You know, I never got a chance to get to know him. It was like a blur because there was so much pain, so much neglect, so much rejection that, you know, you're so busy unconsciously trying to survive that my whole high school years was a blur. I don't remember half of the people I went to high school with. I was so much in pain, so much in the struggle just to survive and to try to get out of the conditions that I was in. And I took on the responsibility of being the person who would help my two brothers to get out of the conditions we were in until I was numb. I wasn't on drugs or anything like that, but I was numb. I was numb to my life. I was numb to the experiences around me. I was numb. That was the only way I knew how to survive. Not allowing anybody to penetrate the walls that I had put up for survival.
Well, and I think that speaks so much to the other cycle that we're breaking. Martin talked about breaking these cycles. I think you've demonstrated too how trauma lives in our body. And as you said, it manifests as disease, which we've talked about in our previous episodes with Cindy Carnegie and Dr. Nilo. And that's what I'm hearing too, is you're breaking a cycle of physical unhealth.
Yes. And I think by doing so, it's, you know, ending it where it doesn't it's not passed on to my daughters, and it's not passed on to the people that I serve and lead, because we could pass on those physical illnesses to people that we serve and lead and people in our lives by us simply, you know, modeling this suppression of what we really feel and the things that are going on inside of us. If we practice suppressing it, then we become a model for suppression, and people think we have a way of looking good in our pain, and people want to emulate what they see that looks good. And oftentimes it's a mask, us hiding the excruciating emotional pain that we are going through on a regular basis, that we are taught to not express because we are afraid of judgment.
I've got a question for you, Mahdi. So, you know, based off of what you shared, when would you say was like your turning point? Because you were so numb for so long. And when did you realize that, you know, you needed to heal?
I think it's a good question, Cindy. I think for me, the turning point was realizing that the way I was going, the direction I was going, and what I was experiencing was so devoid of life that it took me through 16 years of deep depression, chronic depression. And it was actually an out-of-body experience that I had that woke me up to the finality of life in this form, in this body that I'm in right now. That really recalibrated my respect for life and my respect for my body. And I begged to be able to stay, because my spirit came out of my body. And in experiencing my spirit come out of my body, I realized that who I was living in that body. And that if I keep toying around with the idea of wanting to die, wanting to be gone, that life could make it available for me. And when I discovered what it feels like to lose life, to lose my life while I was still around my life, it changed my perspective completely. It was like I saw a ghost, and the ghost was me.
Yeah.
And you know, like I said, I begged for a chance to really stay. And ever since then, I never looked back. And it's been a growth process. It wasn't a miraculous thing where that day everything changed, but that day everything began to change. And one step at a time, I leaned into it. And I've always been that kind of person that I've leaned to the understanding of my spirit, understanding of direction of my internal divinity that I've always believed in, which has kept me on the right path.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
You're
The
welcome.
image that comes to mind for me when I think of you based off of this whole conversation is, Mahdi, I don't think I've ever had a conversation this vulnerable with you where I hear your vulnerability, right? Like, you know, I've heard previous podcasts about your upbringing, but I really feel like I can feel the hurt that you have dealt with. And so the image that comes to me for you is the rose that grew out of the crack of the concrete. You know, you've dealt with so much pain, but, you know, echoing Martina, like, I have so much respect for you. You are such an amazing leader. And I'm just so thankful for you and the Soul Focus group. And just hearing your story, it just even more builds this deep level of respect for you that I've already had. So just thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your story with us.
You're welcome, Cindy. I really appreciate you saying that, because for a lot of years, I really have not. I was so good at going into people's lives, but not allowing people to come into my life. I mastered that skill, and my internal intelligence self on a higher level said to me, you are not going to succeed like that. If you want to go into other people's lives, you're going to have to let them in your life. So I had to learn to be vulnerable. I had to learn to express the pain inside of me. I had a great grandmother. Her name was Mabel G. Landry. And I was raised by her and my grandmother, my daddy's mother. And there were times when I was so upset with my dad for him doing some very dumb stuff that was very painful and hurtful. And I would come to my great grandmother's house, and I remember sitting down at the bar in our house, and she would say, I'm not going to give you permission to hate your father. And, you know, I would start complaining, and I was about to use a lot of hate language and hurtful language because I was in a lot of pain. And she says, I won't give you permission to hate your father. And I said, why not? She says, because if you hate your father, you're going to hate yourself.
That's deep.
And believe it or not, that in a lot of ways saved me. That saved me.
Wow.
And most of us don't realize that the hate of those who have traumatized us in some way only becomes the hate what you have of yourself.
And I feel like that hate can be so consuming.
Yes, you walk around with it. That's what she was saying to me. It would turn into the hate that you will walk around in. That environment will become your environment, not your father's environment. It's like sometimes we think if I cut my foot, then you're going to bleed. No, it's not how it works. So the hate we walk around in is the hate we walk around in.
Thank you, Mahdi.
You're welcome, Cindy. Thank you for asking.
Of course. And I feel like our listeners who are listening to this conversation can take away so much. You know, you have spoken your truth, and this is great perspective, right? And, you know, I'm feeling this in my body right now, you know, where this is just it's an enlightening conversation, but it is also very heavy because of how vulnerable everybody is in this conversation. Yeah. But I just want to end with that what you shared is beautiful, that I'm still unpacking that, right? I will not give you permission to hate your father, because then you will hate yourself. And I know a lot of people who are dealing with that, but even myself, trying not to hate the person who caused me trauma, because then that hate consumes me.
Yes.
So thank you. I resonate so much with this conversation.
You're welcome. That was wisdom from my great grandmother. I thank God for her being in my life, and my grandmother for being in my life, because they were such leaders of our community, and what they knew and shared with me is what has become a lot of the systems and technology that I've developed comes almost directly from their lips.
That's beautiful.
Yes.
I want to, add my thanks to you, Mahdi. I mean, this was an incredible conversation. And I really want to thank Cindy and Martina for bringing their full selves, their perspective, and their voice. Because, this podcast has featured a lot of one-on-one conversations with you and I, Mahdi. And I'm just sitting here listening and seeing how Cindy and Martina have helped take this to a whole other level. And so I want to, thank you for coming on. And I really want to thank you, Cindy, and you, Martina, for helping bring this conversation to a whole level that really doesn't just talk about emotional vulnerability and healing from trauma, but, the energy of it, the feeling of it is present, not just the words.
Thank y'all for the opportunity.
We say often people won't remember what we say, but how we make them feel. And I think to me, that's so true from today's conversation with all of you. Thank you, Mahdi. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Martin, for giving me a feeling that it's going to stay with me as I reflect on our conversation and explore, my own journey into healing and grief. So thank you all so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Martina.
And I just, want to thank everybody as well. But especially you, Mahdi. I feel like the wisdom that you've shared has really helped me just move along in this healing journey of mine. And thank you to, your grandma and your great grandma for all the wisdom that they've shared, that you've been able to pass along to not only myself, but all of our listeners and anybody that's ever crossed paths with you.
Thank you for that, Cindy.
When you come to the Soul Focus Group, you come to an acknowledgement that there has been injuries done to us from all these different forms of oppression. Injuries that have impacted our subconscious mind, our heart, our spirit, our very soul. So at the Soul Focus Group, we recognize that and we focus on healing. Healing, the return or the recovery of our connections to our healthy self, our beautiful thinking mind. We want you to come join us in a movement of healing all around the world to restore us back to our rightful state. At the Soul Focus Group, we heal.
I hope you all enjoyed listening to that as much as I did. And I listened back to it, and I was blown away. And I'm so thankful to Mahdi for coming on and being so vulnerable with us, so open and honest, and practicing, what we talk about at Soul Focus Group all the time. And he really shared at a deep level. And thank you to Martina and Cindy for helping us to get to that place of emotional vulnerability. So we're going to continue to talk about healing from trauma in different ways in the coming weeks and months. But we really wanted to tie these two topics together. So thank you so much for listening. As we always say, and we mean it from the bottom of our hearts, we love each and every one of you. And we're so glad to have you on this journey with us. We ask that you go to soulfocusedgroup.com, subscribe, like, share, help us grow our community, which is growing really fast. Check out all the offerings that we have. And I've been saying this for a long time, but I think actually by the end of this month in early December, we will actually have our brand new website up, which we're so excited for you to go and check out. So with that, we ask, as always, that you stay safe, you stay well, and most of all, stay soul focused.